Good morning.
Good morning.
Come on in, grab yourself a seat. You'll have to forgive me. I feel very sneezy this morning. I feel like I have it. So if at one point it finally comes loose, we'll see. Go ahead and take your Bibles and turn to the book of Ecclesiastes. I'm going to take my keys out of my pocket. Is my mic on? Am I good? All right. Turn to the book of Ecclesiastes, and we're going to start there in chapter 1 there at the beginning. I was looking a little bit at the book of Ecclesiastes, and I, not intentionally or anything, but I feel like sometimes, is the book of Ecclesiastes, I'm curious, is that anyone's favorite book of the Bible? Or maybe the top 5 or so of the books of the Bible? I came to the conclusion for myself it sometimes goes a little bit unnoticed or forgotten, not completely and not out of intentionally. I mean, sometimes I'll take and find myself going to Ecclesiastes and have a verse in one of my other messages in there. But to take a look at it from beginning to the end, I've read through it. I've looked at it before in that regards in my own Bible reading stuff, but I've never really taken and studied and looked at it from beginning to end. And perhaps this is the beginning of doing so. But you take a look at the book of Ecclesiastes, and the word Ecclesiastes comes from a Hebrew word that essentially comes to meaning preacher or assembler. And right there in the first verse of referring to the words of the preacher and the message that goes about of what comes from it. As we take a look, we see there at the beginning the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Of the heading of who takes and has compiled the book, who writes this message from beginning to end to us, and they don't come right out and give us their name, but there's enough clues there for us to take and realize of who it is, of our understanding to be King Solomon. Now, we know he's a son of David, and we know he was a king. He's a king in Jerusalem, and he's the only one of David's sons who was king in Jerusalem, because right immediately after him, his son, the kingdom was divided, and no longer was there a king of a son of David who had rule over Jerusalem after his dividing as such. Now, I'm not sure if it's unlikely that Solomon knew that was, going to happen as he writes this, and maybe if there continued to be sons of David's who were king in Jerusalem, he would have remained a little bit more anonymous in writing this book of the Bible. But we see through this introduction, and we understand to be him. And if we take a look at the portions of Proverbs that Solomon writes, and you see that comes from of what it's somewhat agreed of a bit earlier in the life of Solomon, of writing especially. And you take a look at Ecclesiastes of being, he's older, he's lived a little longer, he's made some mistakes, and he calls and addresses of them in the book of Ecclesiastes, and look into, he's lived some mistakes, he's lived this long life of wealth, and as this ruler and everything that he's done, and it comes and compiles it and takes and puts it on the pages there, and of what we take from it, here's a man who has made some mistakes, and he sets up warnings and for the anticipation for others to not follow into these things and to take and continue to make God the center of their being. Now, as I said before briefly with my personal experience of looking towards the book of Ecclesiastes, I feel like there's certain portions of it I've given more attention to for myself in the past. I would refer probably out of those of chapter 3 or certainly chapter 5. There's a lot of important things through there of taking and looking to, but of, as I said, the book in its whole, in its entirety going through. The tone of Ecclesiastes is somewhat different than early Proverbs and going through. I've referred to Ecclesiastes as sad Proverbs. A little bit, a little bit tongue-in-cheek there, but there's more of a grave tone in that said of a man who has made mistakes and lived through and has taken in times in his life of not honored God properly. But through all this, we take and look at the writer and say of this sadness and this despair, and looking at life and some of the portions of it that there's great meaningless to it. You say, is he all right? He's probably someone we need to pray through and check in on and making sure that he's okay, and looking. And as you get into it, you yourself can kind of walk away with a little bit of, a little despair, a little bit of sorrow when you take and you just get into it. But it is embedded also throughout with the hope of his experience. If you take it real briefly and look to chapter 12 and verse number 1. Chapter 12 and verse 1, it says, "Remember now thy Creator in the days of thy youth, while the evil days come not, nor the years draw nigh, when thou shalt say, I have no pleasure in them." So the instruction is at its core in the message is to take and to consider the Creator and to consider the God in all of our ways, and especially if we have the benefit to do so at a young age and from the beginning of our life, to make that the center of our mindset and the center of what we strive to do. For as this verse indicates, while the evil days come not, nor the years draw nigh, of when things start to go difficult, or by our own creation, by our own falling away from God, of some of those difficult and evil times that would come upon us, to take and preserve ourselves from them. In the same chapter, in verse number 13 and 14, the final verses of the entire book of what it all comes down to, and the portion of the purpose of the message. It says in verse 13, "Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God shall bring every work into judgment with every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil." So you see there, it boils down to the hopeful mindset and the conclusion of everything and consideration of a life of a man, and the final of our full duty to take and fear and respect God, to follow and keep over his commandments. This is the duty of man, to take and serve God in obedience and to follow after the commandments for him. And we take and recognize as God being the judge of every man, and he will judge accordingly to the evil and to the good. When you look at someone who takes and passes over judgment, you take and you picture the judge sitting on the throne with the gavel, and he clamps the gavel as he passes the sentence of some punishment that is fitting for some sort of crime. Or you think about the judgment of a goodly reward for some good deed or some good service, of just, if any of you have had the pleasure of going down to one of the county fairs, and you look at all the categories and all the beautiful blue ribbons and the second place ribbons upon the things. A judge walked through there, and they took and they observed all that there is, the pies, the quilts, the animals, the livestock, of everything that was entered, the paintings and everything, the bouquets and everything, and they judged accordingly, given through the perimeters that were set up and have been held to since the beginning of those fairs, and they awarded accordingly in that judgment. As we see, if God does the same of both giving the reward as it is fit by his perimeters that he sets to be judged. He will reward those with a goodly reward, and he will reward those with a reward for something that is not good. This is the core of the challenge that we find in the book of Ecclesiastes, to have God at the center of our mindset, the center of our lives, and that we would live more abundantly if we did so. Now, as we go into back to the first chapter there in chapter 1 of Ecclesiastes, we looked at verse number 1 as the heading and the heading of the author, the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. And we take and we see how he introduces himself, and he's taking the role of this preacher for the benefit of any who will take and read of this, of his assembly, of his kingdom, of God's people, of any who will take and read of this. Now, like I said before, he doesn't take and stamp his name upon it, but he does stamp upon there the credentials he has, so you have an understanding. He's not going to hide throughout this whole thing in declaring that he was the king of Jerusalem. And the benefit of that attempt will be of looking and recognizing all this from the point of view from a person who God took and set up in that position as king, as someone who, as it gets into describing the wealth that one can attain in this world, and someone who has reached the heights of what would be described as one of the wealthiest men in all of human civilization history, and yet still he was in places where he was found discontent and wanting and striving for more during those times. As he begins to describe very brutally and very brutally and just very upfront, it just grabs the attention immediately of the reader. It says, "Vanity of vanities, saith the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity." So you look at the idea of this vanity of this substance of what is, it's an emptiness. It's a never-ending pursuit to satisfy some desire, some scratch that won't be itched. It's a fruitless desire you won't see an end to. It's an endeavor for it. See, of these things that were once of the grand pursuit of an individual, and then as time goes on and it's revealed to be of nothing. It wasn't worth it in the end, essentially. Everything that was strived for, it didn't bring lasting happiness or joy of whatever the thing is. I mentioned all those beautiful ribbons that are awarded at the fair. Now, many of those ribbons were probably held onto and treasured. And from all time, and they get it out and tell the story to the person who baked that pie or raised that sheep or whatever thing. But how many ribbons can be accounted for? Just think about it for a second. I think for me, one of the saddest things ever to see is to walk into some sort of pawn shop or antique store or a Goodwill and to see these trophies or these medals, even military medals, that they have lost their meaning. There's no person, no individual that has it. They're lost to time, and now they're on these shelves, and you could pick it up for a handful of dollars, and you could look and you could research into it and find out of what had to be accomplished to gain this honor, this reward in this. And there's a sadness there, taking a realizing of this, of it's lost all its meaning, it's lost, the value is no longer there attached to the person and the individual who put all the blood, sweat, and tears and the labor and the pursuit into that meaningful thing. We put a lot of stock into those trophies and what they represent of some sort of feat that was accomplished. They take and looked at, it's no secret that I enjoy sports. But give me some sort of random year, I might even be able to tell you, who won the college football national championship that year, or maybe even a little bit in some other sports. But take me out of the field, ask me NBA outside of the ones that Jordan won. I'm not going to be able to tell you. I could probably barely tell you who won last year's. No, let me try. I think it was the Thunder, but before that, I have no idea. But of all these things to say, of all the pursuit in it and the vanity that was, I mean, in the end, it's really most meaningful to those individuals, those ribbons that won. And now I could take and I could purchase one of those blue ribbons that we spoke of from the fair at a local pawn shop, and I could take and I could wear it myself and stuff. It would be silly. It would be ridiculous. I can't even bake a pie. But if I was taking and wearing this, there's no meaning to it there. But this goes far beyond that select few examples that I chose to use and to look to. The things that we would strive for, that we would put so much importance. But it's funny even of using the lens from individual to individual where the meaning is suddenly diminished. I care about things that some of you do not care about in the slightest. And it would go vice versa. Everything that's meaningful to Savannah is not meaningful to me. And it even transferred to her sister, of even in the same family, of the same bonds of there, of just the things that it would garner our interests and our pursuit and our desires, everything that there is. We take and we look at this as it goes on in verse number 3. If he asks this question of what profit hath a man of all his labor which he taketh under the sun? Of all those things, all the hard work that went into those rewards, the hard work that we put into our day-to-day jobs, we take and we go, and our pursuit is to do an honest day's labor for an honest day's pay, and to have it, and by no means are we held there just for the love of the game and the desire just because we really like the chosen job we have. You're not down at the Chick-fil-A just because of how much you love chicken, right, James? No, if one day they said, James, we'd like you to keep coming in every day as you're scheduled, but we're no longer going to be paying you, and you're not going to be getting that check every 2 weeks or so. You're not going to stick around very long, are you? No, you're probably going to be out the door the next second of having that. You do all that work because you're expecting the pay for it. And here we say, of having this all, of what's the profit of it, and we would quickly say, well, the money there, and we use that money because it's necessary, because we have to pay for food, we have to pay for shelter, and and then we got to buy that car so that we can get to and fro. We got to pay for that car that gets us to that job, that pays for the car, and through the work of it, you can start going down this spiral of taking in all these things and just considering and you start trying to figure out, well, how much can I go through? How much do I really need? How much of all of it? And then there's the whole equation of, don't forget that hot sun that we work underneath. That's the difficulty in the work of the outsider, what other different things that come along. But we have the understanding, we just know this is necessary. This was set up for us back in Genesis. Let's turn over there real quick. As we took and we look and see of where God gives this description to Adam after they eat off of the tree and says, this is how it's going to be for you, and this is how it's going to be for everybody that comes after you. In Genesis chapter 3 and verse number 17, I believe. It says, and unto Adam he said, because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded thee, saying, thou shalt not eat of it, cursed is the ground for thy sake. In sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life. Thorns also the thistles shall it bring forth to thee, and thou shalt eat the herb of the field. In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread, till thou return unto the ground, for out of it wast thou taken, for dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return. So from that point forward on of this, some sort of work, and not everybody's a farmer anymore, but everybody's going to work for that bread based off of the sweat of their brow, some sort of work they find and they have to do, and this is how it's going to be, and more difficulty came from it, from that profession of the farming, of now the thorns and the thistles that were not there before are going to come up and make this job even more difficult to take and go about. And this is how it is. And here we find Solomon taking and questioning these things of where's the profit in it. Well, we take and we look and see, we say, well, the profit is that we get to eat that night, of having it. And we look at, back to Proverbs chapter 14, we would assume by the same author there of 14:23, of speaking on the same subject here, in all labor there is profit, but the talk of the lips tendeth only to penury. And what that verse there is saying, in all labor there is profit, but talk of the lips tendeth to penury, of only when you actually get to work and you do that labor does something come of it. There's profit from the action of putting to work. But you stand around and talk about the work that's going to be done. You talk and you explain and go about it, and you keep saying of what you're going to do and what it's going to benefit. Only when you stop talking and actually put your hands to work and start doing the do, then of the profit comes from it. So is this contradicting of what we see here in Ecclesiastes, of the questioning of what profit does come away from it? Well, we take in a line of what we understand is what we have from God giving us the instruction over in Genesis, is there's going to be the profit of we're going to eat, we're going to have it, we have money, we can buy things, and we can take and make our lives as comfortable as it will be. But in the end of just as those rewards that we discussed over, eventually all those things are going to pass away. Eventually that car is going to break down that you spent so much money for. Eventually that house is going to wear and decay over amount of time. If you're in the profession as in construction and building, someday the buildings that you had a part in building, they're going to tear them down and they're going to make way for new buildings. I take and consider every time I'm on a new job and thinking about, I like to know what was there before. We did a little bit of job right off the highway. How many remember when the Sunshine Dairy plant was right there off the highway and they had that giant milk carton that said Sunshine Dairy on the side? Well, they tore that down and now there's an apartment complex there. I spent a lot of time on that job and taking a build there. It's not there anymore. There used to be that big old milk carton right next to the radio and tower. And I did a lot of reading when I was on that job about how that all happened and the history of it. Somebody built that dairy production line one day, and then somebody tore it down, somebody built something else, and someday if the Lord tarries and time goes on, someone's going to tear down the building I had part in and someone else is going to build it up. But probably long after I'm gone. I don't know. Maybe that building will fall down sooner, and don't blame me if that happens. We see of all this, so the question of putting towards it of where's the profit of it? Where's the benefit of? And verse number 3, what profit have a man of all his labor which he taketh under the sun? Of everything that is done there. Of here we take and we're determining of what this true profit is. If where's the fulfillment and the happiness in this life? Now that's something that a lot of people don't want to hear about, is that having more won't make them happy. You say we hear that said in a few different ways and paraphrased back and forth of money can't buy you happiness, of the things that happen. Every child who has pined over and wanted that toy and they thought it would be the epitome of their happiness, and just they can just die happy at that point and they get it and they enjoy it for the there's some disappointment. Now we look at the child and we'll quickly to point it out there, but sometimes we're a little more restrained when we look to the adult in the same situation. Now, the only difference between the child and the adult is the toys get a little more expensive and get a little more extravagant and stuff of having that way. And we could sit here and go through some of the things that draw our interest to. And, I have my own silly little things that I've taken that I've put too much money into, too much time, and in the end to look at it and say, now, where do I even put this stuff at this point? And that's the epitome of it. And that's the going through of the pursuit of a collector who the value is in the eye of the beholder. And you take and try show that thing to somebody else who doesn't have the same appreciation in it as you do. Trust me, I've tried this with Sarah, and they go, that's nice. If it makes you happy, I'm happy for you at that point. The kindness is on there, but it's a reality check there to show you of how much something's only worth as much as the next person's willing to pay for it. And over time, that just diminishes. We see here of the question that puts forward of the money won't buy us happiness. And a lot of people do not want to hear that, especially from certain people. I've read before of certain the news of individuals like Mark Zuckerberg. If you know him, he's the guy who he made Facebook. So he's very rich and wealthy off it. Elon Musk, very wealthy and stuff. And the Amazon guy. And they've made similar statements in all their wealth and say, it's really true what they say. It doesn't buy it. And guess what? People just don't want to hear it from those guys. They say, sure, you have how many cars, how many houses, and all this wealth and stuff. And you say, look at these problems that I'm going through and stuff. But we're looking towards physical needs that we may be personally taking and struggling in. And we wish we were a little bit more financially stable. We wish we were a little bit more able to provide for our families in a little bit more of abundance than is in our means. So we take and we look at these wealthy individuals who, guess what, they're not wrong, but we just don't want to hear it from that message. So think about the same thing of hearing it from King Solomon, who I've already mentioned to my belief of the wealthiest men who's ever lived. And imagine of him saying these similar things of, it's all nothing. It's all meaningless. Of in the end, I've come to realize of everything that I've enjoyed, and I've had as many wives as I wanted, and I've had as much gold, and I've had all the wealth of any of these nations could offer me, and it's all just vanity, and it's all nothing. It's all of this. And you imagine in the day and age there of some of the individuals I mentioned in likeness to of, You just don't want to hear all that. You just want to take and close yourselves off to that message, whether you take and recognize of the truth of it as once. Go to a different individual who spoke on that similar message. Christ said a lot about on the satisfaction of what this world has to offer, and you find it lacking. Over and over again in his ministry, he would take and trying to encourage individuals to not look at the wealth that they could possess or the rank that they could command, and looking towards their fulfillment and their striving for those things, and to pull them back. You look and consider of what he told the woman at the well about the water that the world gives. He says that you're going to be thirsty. You're going to need that drink again. You're going to be looking for a little bit more in a very short amount of time later on in comparison to the water that he gives. If you take and you look at the next few verses in Ecclesiastes from 4 to 8, it says, "One generation passeth away, and another generation cometh, but the earth abideth forever. And the sun also ariseth, and the sun goes down and hastens to his place where he arose. The wind goeth toward the south and turneth about unto the north. It whirleth about continually, and the wind returneth again according to his circuits. All this rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full. Unto the places from whence the rivers come, thither they return again. All things are full of labor. Man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing." Now, to really hammer away this point, he goes into this description about the world just continuing on with all the motions and the work and the energy that is into it, of all these natural occurring things that we find of the rivers and the wind and the sun and the continued rotation of the earth going around it. And if you've ever heard somebody taking something, some minor inconvenience happens, and somebody says in a little bit of sarcastic of the world just keeps on spinning. And it's kind of what's being said here, of the world just keeps on rotating, to really drive forward with the point of the life full of memories and pursuits and everything, and the shortness of just those grains of sand in the hourglass as they pass away, of the individual who takes and they live and they die, and the sun comes up tomorrow. And even in our own loved ones, we haven't any of us experienced this for ourselves personally, of we die and then the world goes on. We won't care at that point. We'll be dead and wait. But individuals who we've loved, and we say that they died, and even taken, say for myself, some thoughts of how is the sun even going to come up tomorrow? In the literal sense, or in the sense of how am I going to continue day to day after this? But the world keeps moving on, and all these things, and the rivers continue to flow, the never stopping and at rest, and yet the oceans aren't filled up and overflowing at this point. And there's that old riddle that says, what has a bed but never sleeps? It's a river. It never stops. You've never gone and snuck up on the river and found it idle, not moving along. It's continual, and you take and you can trace back and find out where that water flows into and where it's heading. I poured over the maps before in our own state of Oregon here of the Columbia, of how it comes from the ocean and it goes out, and where it goes, and the Willamette just keeps on going into other states outside of ours. It's very interesting, but just the never ceasing movement and the never ceasing moment is saying all this of continuation. And lastly, of looking at this man, of his eye unsatisfied and the ear that's never full, of the pursuit of the things that you can experience, the things that you could desire, but of all this, and it doesn't matter without God at the center, as the book of Ecclesiastes goes on to expand to. Let's look more at what, as I said, Christ has much to say about this. If you turn back to Matthew chapter 16. In Matthew chapter 16, in verse number 26, it says, "For what is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul?" He's saying you can have everything this whole world could desire. Taking consideration of Satan bringing Christ above and showing him everything there is to have command over in all the land, and offering it if he bows down and worships him. And Christ saying you can look and behold all these things, but what is it to you if you don't have eternal security of your soul? You're going to lose that, and you're going to be separated from God eternally into eternal damnation. And you could have lived a full life and had everything that you could ever desired before you barely even had to think about and strive and make it happen, delivered to you on a silver platter. But what is it all going to be worth if you lose your soul? And Matthew chapter 6 expands upon this, of going back to, let me turn back to 6. In Matthew 6 and verse number 19, it says, Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through nor steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Of taking and saying of the encouragement that we have of the pursuit of all these things, to take and use your time in a more meaningful, to lay up these treasures in heaven, of all these things. And we discuss some of these things of how time passes on and these things take and fall to naught. And they'll crumble away, and the car will break down, and everything we will take and live and die. But the things we take and should have our more focus on is the eternal things, the things that last eternally and forever. In Proverbs chapter 27, in Proverbs 27 and verse number 20, it says, this is in Proverbs chapter 27, where it talks about the virtuous woman, and gives some of the descriptions about this woman, and it takes of everything of the things that she does and the things that are important to her that work up to giving her this credit of being called of a woman of virtue. And it would take and be our desire to also strive to be of a virtuous nature. And one of the things that is accounted for her in verse number 20, it says, She stretcheth out her hand to the poor, yea, she reached for her hands to the needy. And I wrote down the wrong verse. One second, I will find it. Thank you. In verse number 31, give her the fruit of her hand and let her... I'm sorry. I'm in the wrong chapter? Is that what you're telling me? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I put my bookmark in the wrong place. And I trusted it rather than the number. In Proverbs 27 and verse number 20, it says, hell and destruction are never full, so the eyes of man are never satisfied. So these are both verses that I wanted to use, but I mixed them up in the thing. This is going for of the eye of man, of giving further description, how we're never satisfied of everything that we see, with taking the desire of it, of even going back to the garden, looking at what was the senses that were gone to in Eve as she took the fruit and took into consideration where they were dwelling in this perfect place where every need that they had was provided for them. And she looked upon the fruit, and what she saw of it is it appeared to be good for eating, and it was lovely. It was something described of it. We got different fruits that immediately you look upon, and perhaps we're just, generators of our prior experiences with the desire. It's delicious. It's yummy. We look to it. Now, there's some fruits that you look on and said, why did someone ever try eating that in the first place? It doesn't even look like something you could take and eat upon it. But there's the things of taking and looking of everything that we look upon that would take and we would strive after to try and satisfy ourselves of wanting more for it. Let's go over to Luke chapter 12 as we're taking and coming to close. Luke chapter 12 and verse number 15. I would refer to this as the most pointed parable that Jesus gives in regarding of the pleasures of this world and the wealth that can be accumulated, and getting to that place where it becomes so meaningless and it becomes of such non-effect for the individual who at one point achieved this rank and achieved this command over it. In Luke chapter 12 and verse number 15, it says, And he said unto them, take heed and beware of covetousness, for the man's life consisteth not in the abundance of the things which he possesseth. Now, he makes this statement to two individuals, two men who are having trouble dividing amongst themselves an inheritance that was given to them. And they come to Jesus because they have to understand he's a wise man. He knows a lot, and he has a good reputation. And we'll use him as this impartial judge that would come and take and divide this for us. And they bring this before Jesus, and you see from his reaction of, he doesn't want any part in this decision of this. He says, this is even a waste of his consideration, of his time, of having it there, of taking and dividing of this. So rather, he gives them something so much more important to take and to think and to dwell on. He says, no, consider this instead as you take and you look at all your greed and your covetousness, as you look upon everything that has. It's not about what a man possesses when he comes to the end of his life. He gives them this parable in verse 16. He says, and he spake a parable unto them, saying, the ground of a certain rich man brought forth plentifully. And he thought within himself, saying, what shall I do? Because I have no room where to bestow my fruits. And he said, this will I do. I will pull down my barns and build greater. And there will I bestow all my fruits and my goods. And I will say unto my soul, soul, thou hast much goods laid up for many years. Take thine ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said unto him, thou fool, this night thy soul shall be required of thee. Then who shall those things be which thou hast provided? So is he that layeth up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. He takes them, he introduces them to this rich man who has everything, and he's been very blessed of everything that he's planted in the ground. He's had an abundance in his crops and his harvest, and his barns were too small. So he says, I'm going to take and I'm going to make these plans. I'm going to tear them down so I can build up larger barns. I only got so much land. I can't just build more. I'm going to build bigger and improved ones. I have the wealth to do so now. And he's going to have all this, and he takes and he looks upon and he surveys everything that he has, and he's very comfortable in it. But he dies that night, and his soul's required of him, meaning that that night he dies and his soul ends up in one place or the other, heaven or hell, and eternally. They say all these things and all this wealth, it was not going to take and buy him his ticket into heaven. It wasn't going to take and count for him in the eternity of everything that he had possessed at this hand. Now, God's not against us having something. Our pastor used to always say God's not against us having a little bit of something, but God's against a little bit of something having us. You see, we can look towards some biblical evangelists who someone in their wealth maintained a relationship with God and served him. And we look to Job, who God himself brought to his name before Satan himself and said, consider my servant Job. And look at the blessing that Job possessed at that point and the wealth that he had, and consider him. But unlike this man who Christ refers to, of Job had that understand that relationship to God. And he looked towards his joy and everything towards God instead of what he had. And he proved through all that of losing it all and maintaining that that service to God and that desire, and he will not take and sin against him by the word of his voice and curse after him and die of what was brought before him in suggestion. They say here's a man named Job who maintains all that in his wealth and stuff, and everything that we have in our prosperity and everything that we have upon this world, we should take and always consider God in it all. We should all take and look to God in regard as the source from our blessings, and we thank him for what he has bestowed upon us, and we thank him for it. We take and we would not want those things to take and get in the way of our relationship with God. Not take and pull away our focus and everything, that we should look at it and see God through it. We see God through the blessing of those around us and our loved ones, of the glory of his creation. Of it really pricked my heart so to take and read over there in Ecclesiastes Ecclesiastes is the description of this wonderful world around us, of the oceans and the rivers, stuff. They say, this is stuff that I really enjoy and all these things of it, but to take and not consider God in any of it, to take and look and not have it work as a testimony of his wonder and his creation, of his power, before to take and create something of great design, but take and look at it. The world looks at those things as just of, there's wonder and there's God there. I think there's a lack of a greater appreciation when someone doesn't look and behold those things through those eyes of observing and taking and looking towards a grand creator in it. I think there's more of a lack of appreciation for the things that we can take and look towards God, and certainly not something that we would want to find in the heart of us as believers, to take and not consider God and all the things that we have, to not consider God and the blessings that he's bestowed before us. As we take and we look back to this introduction in this book of Ecclesiastes, and we take and we go through and look and recall once again those verses later on in the book in chapter 12, and to take and have God at the center of this being, because there were times in Solomon's life where, admittedly so, he lost focus upon God. And he took and he, even in all his grand wisdom and his wealth and stuff, of times where he did not take and trust God. And we have descriptions of that in the scripture and through the places that record his rule over, where he'd rather take and be involved in these different, involved in these different contracts of mutual understanding between the alliances. That's the word I'm looking for. These alliances with those around him, and making sure that the more alliances he had, makes it the greater of the threat of anyone who would take and challenge him, would be challenging these other kingdoms and everything. Whereas if he would have took and looked to God first for his true and only alliance, of alliancing himself with God's will and aligning of everything that he has, of God far more capable to take and to protect him and bless him in all those times of uncertainty, rather than the kings and the queens surrounding around him in his place. And we take and look towards, as we go deeper in the book of Ecclesiastes, to look at God and to take and view it through the lens of this. Because the world is a much darker place without that mindset, without that focus upon God at the center of it. And you would only look towards the chaos and the turmoil surrounding around ones, and the worry and the concern. And it's no wonder that people get caught up in taking and looking of every conflict or every scare through health or through outside countries and the country they live in, and looking at it of just as nothing more as if I had that mindset, I could just look at myself as a leaf that is at the whim of the elements, of wherever the wind is going to take and everywhere it's going to pull, and I'm at the great mercy of just wherever the wind blows at that time. But we take and we look to God and recognize that there's a far grander design, and we're involved in it, and we should also take and have that of our mindset for it. Let's go, Lord, in prayer this morning. Lord, we come before you and just ask and pray that as we look to honor and please you in our lives, Lord, that we look towards loving you and your commandments and following after them first, Lord. I just ask and pray that as we take and we consider everything that we have and all the opportunities that we possess, Lord, that we would recognize that your call for us and your pointed direction for us is to care more about the internal things, Lord. Of not the things that are going to fall away and be corrupted, but Lord, rather to be about the work that you set before us. I just ask and pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Let's